Hey, storytellers. I hope you're doing well out there. Welcome to our last week together. So, this is one of the last videos from me you'll see, and it's certainly the last lecture that we'll provide. Again, we don't have any sort of writing assignments that are due this week. You just have your upcoming final exam, which I'll distribute a handout for, as well as your final competitive audit analysis, which is also available via handout, and I'll produce a separate explainer video going through some strategies for success on that. This is like I said, our last week together, and we've come a long way since we began this course talking about cave paintings painted by Neanderthals 40,000 years ago, somewhere in the middle of Spain or Indonesia. We've moved through a great deal of neuroscience, but we're also mastering a few basic communication principles after we've transitioned from the kind of conceptual and historical and cultural parts of the course, weeks 1 through 3, into the much more directly practical sides of the course weeks 4 through 6. This last week is actually where we're escalating beyond storytelling, and we're starting to think about storytelling not as a company telling a story by itself, alone by itself in the world, but in effect, the way that stories align themselves within and against one another in specific industries, and also align themselves again and within and against one another within the minds of specific consumers. That is just a fancy way of saying that stories don't exist by themselves, and the storyteller does not control the mind of the listener or the audience. And so this advanced concept that we're talking about, where we're evaluating not just the content and structure and writing and images associated with particular stories, but instead moving a step forward, a step beyond, and saying, well, how does this story compare to other stories within a specific industry? For instance, how does Mike's company's story about itself, its marketing strategy, its persona, compare to somebody else's persona and marketing strategy within that same industry? And what that is called a comparative analysis of stories within industries linked to companies is called positioning. Brand positioning is about how my company is positioned competitively against other companies within that same field. And similarly, how are consumers interpreting the story that I'm trying to tell through my marketing collateral? And how is my company positioned within and against other companies within the minds of consumers? Now, I'll just begin by saying that this lecture, in a large sense, is really about several different skill building techniques for positioning analysis. We're going to go through the POEMS strategy of media content, and we'll also go through a lot of ideas from one of the founding gurus of the storytelling approach. The course is in part based on a guy named Donald Miller, and specifically where we talk about Don Miller's use of one-liners to create differentiation amongst brands. But really, in a general sense, positioning analyses comes down to 7 different characteristics. And because there's 7, I'm going to rely somewhat on my notes here, just so I don't forget anything. But there's 7 different ways, in a nutshell, in the broadest possible sense, that brands can differentiate themselves from one another, how they can position themselves as being a market leader or standing out from the clutter and the din of noise associated with any given industry, like the cola industry or the airline industry or the car industry. How does Kia stand out? How does Coca-Cola stand out? How does Southwest Airlines stand out? That is a question that's not just about story, but it's also about brand positioning, which is an analysis of a competition amongst stories within any given industry. So those 7 strategies, all told, are: first, a company can stand out through its excellence in customer service. It begins to tell a story about itself and practice what it preaches when it comes to actually having human beings helping other human beings in an incredibly timely manner. This is something that Costco really strives to do. Costco, the massive retail warehouse. There's another specific strategy that companies will use, which is convenience. Starbucks tries to position itself on virtually every corner in the United States. You see lots of gas stations like BP or Super America in the Midwest try to do this, not necessarily being the best at any given thing or the cheapest at any given thing, but certainly the most available. Price is an obvious point of positioning differentiation, and what we find here are budget airlines trying to stand out amongst more competitive ones. And then, by contrast, quality of the good, superiority of the product is one way to stand out. We find budget unfriendly additions to the marketplace, for instance, Dyson vacuums being triple, quadruple what other vacuums cost, but they stand by their product. Their product typically customers find to be much better than, but at the same time, you're paying $500 for a vacuum, so it better be really, really good. The last few Number 5 is differentiation. And differentiation just means coming up with something that is market breaking or market leading or incredibly unique, right? Obviously, Tesla makes cars, but few cars look like, sound like, or even cost like what a Tesla does. So Tesla differentiates itself just by having such a unique product and such a unique market breaking industry. Last two, social media presence. Number 6 can be an incredible differentiator for many brands, just having a robust volume and a specific persona that's adopted via that social media can add a lot to a brand to position itself within the minds of consumers, really having nothing to do with positions of cost or questions of convenience or questions of quality. And the final one is just another strategy, a generic strategy. Number 7 is other. And that means that in some cases we find that brands can position themselves successfully through unique strategies that aren't captured by the first 6. For instance, if a brand had an incredibly aggressive strategy of calling out its competitors, right? An aggressive competitive strategy of going right at its competitors, calling its competitors ads campaigns to task or call them on the floor in some sense, that can be a unique strategy. If a brand was positioning itself as the original of something, right? The forerunner and all that came beyond it, or because of it, right? Kind of the cause and effect, then that would be a unique strategy that would capture by number 7. In any case, that's what brand positioning analysis, and over the course of the next lecture, we'll cover some skills related to positioning analysis as an additional step beyond our focus on storytelling and story branding.